This fragile, cheap piece of trash belongs in the garbage. The heavy steel-toed boot came crashing down with brutal force. The delicate glass rose, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, across the dirty concrete floor. Richard, the arrogant real estate developer, sneered down at the young girl sobbing on the ground. But before he could take another step to crush the remaining shards, a grimy hand grabbed his shoulder, in a vice grip. It was the shop's lowly floor sweeper. A man covered head to toe in soot and ash. His voice was ice cold, and held a terrifying calm. That piece was a masterpiece, and you just destroyed your entire empire, with one stomp. Glass is incredibly fragile, but when you put it through 2,000 degrees of roaring red-hot fire, it transforms into the most brilliant crystal on Earth. If you are facing a massive struggle right now, and absolutely refuse to quit, hit that subscribe button to keep your strength up. And drop this exact declaration in the comments right now. I believe a resilient heart, through the red fire, will turn into a brilliant crystal. Let me tell you about Rose. Her hands were a physical map of deep scars and burn marks. Those marks crisscrossed her knuckles and forearms, a permanent reminder of the blazing kiln she worked at for 14 grueling hours every single day. She was not blowing glass just to make pretty art. Every single vase, every delicate ornament, and every fragile bowl she crafted was a desperate attempt to survive. She was trying to pay for her elderly father's crippling medical bills. He was slowly dying of black lung disease after spending 40 years breathing in coal dust in the local mines. You could hear his painful coughing fits echoing from the tiny apartment directly above the shop. He needed expensive oxygen tanks 24 hours a day just to take a normal breath. And Rose was his absolute only hope in this world. She poured her literal blood, sweat, and tears into that little rundown workspace. But Rose wasn't just an incredibly hard worker with a heavy burden. She had a heart of absolute pure gold. 6 months ago, the absolute worst blizzard of the decade unexpectedly hit their small town. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Most people locked their heavy doors and huddled close to their electric heaters. But Rose heard a terrifying crash out on the icy highway near her shop. She ran out into the blinding, freezing storm, with nothing but a cheap flashlight and a worn-out winter coat. She found a wrecked luxury SUV, completely buried in a massive snowbank. Inside the crushed vehicle was a man and his little girl, both unconscious and freezing to death. Rose did not hesitate for a single second. She dug through the packed ice with her bare hands until her fingers were bleeding and raw. She managed to pull both of them out of the wreckage, completely ignoring the painful frostbite setting into her own skin. She dragged them inside her shop and immediately fired up the massive glass kiln to its absolute maximum temperature, just to keep them warm. She sat by the roaring fire all night, wrapping them in every blanket she owned. She absolutely saved their lives. That freezing night, the man eventually woke up and introduced himself as Henry. He told her he was just a struggling mechanic who had recently lost his job and his home. He begged her to let him sweep the shop floors and clean the filthy ash pits, just to pay her back for her incredible kindness. Rose had almost no extra money to even feed herself, let alone another family. But she looked at the shivering little girl and simply smiled. She took them in, without asking a single question. She shared her meager daily meals of cheap soup and stale bread with him and his daughter. She treated them like they were her own flesh and blood. What Rose did not know was that Henry was not a broke, homeless mechanic. He was secretly evaluating every single thing she did. He quietly watched her work the glowing hot glass. With those scarred, tired hands, he saw the absolute love and fierce devotion she had for her sick, struggling father. He saw a level of pure integrity and raw artistic talent he had not seen in decades of doing business. But a massive storm of trouble was brewing for the little shop. The entire neighborhood was suddenly being targeted by Richard. a famously ruthless real estate developer. Richard wore custom-tailored Italian suits and drove a car that cost more than Rose would make in a lifetime. He did not care about beautiful handmade art or sick old men coughing in the attic. He only cared about bulldozing the entire historic block. To build a massive luxury parking garage for his new hotel, he walked into Rose's dusty shop on a Tuesday afternoon, stepping over the beautiful glass pieces on the floor like they were literal garbage. He looked around with utter disgust and tossed a crumpled legal contract onto her ash-covered workbench. "Sign it right now," he barked, not even taking off his expensive sunglasses. "I am giving you pennies on the dollar for this miserable dump, and I am taking the exclusive copyright to that glass rose design you have been working on in the corner. It might look somewhat acceptable as a cheap, mass-produced trinket in my hotel lobbies." Rose wiped the heavy sweat from her forehead and looked the wealthy man dead in the eye. "This shop is absolutely not for sale," she said firmly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "And that rose is not some cheap trinket for you to steal. I made it to honor my father's difficult life and his beautiful spirit. It has a real soul. And it is not something you can just buy with your dirty money." Richard's face turned completely red, with immediate, explosive anger. Nobody in this town ever said the word no to him. He looked around the poor, dusty shop and let out a loud, cruel laugh that chilled the room. "You have a sick old man upstairs who cannot even breathe on his own. You have hideous scars all over your ugly, overworked hands. You are nothing but a pathetic beggar, playing with melted sand. You will sign this piece of paper right now, or I will have the city inspector condemn this entire building by tomorrow morning. You and your dying father will be sleeping on the frozen sidewalk." Rose's hands were physically shaking, but she absolutely stood her ground. She picked up the thick legal contract and ripped it straight down the middle. She threw the torn pieces right at his expensive leather shoes. "Get out of my shop," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of absolute, unbreakable defiance. Richard completely lost his mind at the disrespect. He screamed at his two massive security guards to completely trash the place. They immediately started violently knocking over the heavy wooden display shelves. Beautiful, delicate glass bowls and intricate vases shattered everywhere, creating a rain of colored glass. Months of Rose's exhausting hard work, totally ruined in a matter of seconds. Then, Richard's greedy eyes locked onto the main centerpiece sitting on the counter, the glass rose. The one single piece Rose had spent over 100 hours painstakingly perfecting, near the blazing fire. He aggressively grabbed it off the velvet display stand and threw it directly to the hard concrete floor. He stomped his heavy leather boot right on top of it, grinding the glass into dust. "This fragile, cheap piece of trash belongs in the garbage," he yelled at the top of his lungs. Rose dropped to her knees, hot tears streaming down her face as she frantically tried to gather the broken pieces of her masterpiece. It was the absolute darkest, the most helpless moment of her entire life. But right at that exact second, the lowly shop helper stepped out from the dark shadows near the kiln. Henry. He was not acting like a scared, quiet floor sweeper anymore. He stepped forward and stood directly between Rose's crying form and the arrogant billionaire. His physical posture was completely different, standing tall and imposing. His eyes held a terrifying, undeniable authority that made the security guards freeze in their tracks. He slipped his soot-covered hand into his dirty apron pocket and quietly pressed a single button on a hidden satellite phone. In the middle of absolute despair, true goodness always finds a way to stand its ground. If you feel that exact same heartbeat within you, drop this in the comments right now. I believe a resilient heart through the red fire will turn into a brilliant crystal. Richard let out another booming, arrogant laugh that shook the small room. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he mocked, pointing his expensive gold pen directly at Henry's dirty face. "You are wearing a trash bag for an apron. And you think you can threaten me? I am going to have my construction crew bring the bulldozers here in exactly 10 minutes. I am going to personally watch them flatten this miserable little shack into the dirt." He turned his back on Henry, completely dismissing him as a crazy homeless man. But less than 3 minutes later, a strange, deep rumbling sound began to echo from the street outside. It was not the loud, clanking sound of heavy construction bulldozers. It was the smooth, powerful hum of massive V12 engines. Suddenly, an entire fleet of 6 sleek, jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantoms pulled up, completely blocking the icy street. Dozens of men in sharp, tailored black suits immediately stepped out and quickly surrounded the tiny glass shop. Richard's smug smile instantly vanished from his face. He recognized those specific luxury vehicles anywhere. They belonged to the Royal Crystal and Diamond Corporation. It was the absolute biggest financial conglomerate in the entire world. Richard had spent the last 6 months practically begging on his hands and knees for their investment board to fund his massive new hotel project. The front door of the glass shop swung open. The corporation's top executive assistant stepped inside, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Richard immediately rushed forward, desperately trying to smooth his wrinkled suit and put on his best, fakest smile. "Mr. Sterling, what an absolute honor to see you here," Richard practically shouted, holding out his trembling hand, but Mr. Sterling completely ignored Richard's outstretched hand. As if he were completely invisible, he walked right past the arrogant billionaire. He stepped over the broken glass and walked straight toward the back of the room. Mr. Sterling stopped directly in front of the grimy, soot-covered floor sweeper. He bowed deeply, perfectly bending at a sharp 90-degree angle. "Mr. Chairman," Sterling said, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room, "the board of directors has authorized the hostile takeover order. Exactly as you requested." Richard felt all the blood physically drain out of his face. In one sickening rush, his knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the wooden counter just to stay standing. The dirty, exhausted floor sweeper slowly wiped the thick gray ash off his face with a clean towel. He was Henry Sterling Sr. He was the absolute undisputed king of the global luxury art market and the wealthiest man on the continent. Henry looked at Richard with eyes colder than the winter blizzard he had survived months ago. "I told you that you just destroyed your empire," Henry said quietly. "Cancel every single line of credit Richard's company currently holds," Henry commanded his assistant, without looking away. "Freeze all of his international bank accounts, liquidate his personal assets, and buy out all of his outstanding hotel debt. By 5 o'clock today, I want him completely bankrupt." Richard dropped directly to his knees on the hard concrete floor, his expensive tailored pants ripping at the seams. "Please, I am begging you," he sobbed, his previous arrogance completely gone. "I will pay double for the shop. I will leave this neighborhood forever. Just please do not take my company." Henry did not even blink. He just nodded to his security team. They immediately grabbed Richard by his expensive collar and dragged him completely out of the shop, tossing him onto the cold sidewalk. When true talent and pure virtue are finally brought out into the beautiful sunlight, it changes everything. Let us affirm that incredible power together, right now. I believe a resilient heart through the red fire will turn into a brilliant crystal. With Richard gone, the room became incredibly quiet and peaceful. Henry slowly knelt down on the dusty floor, right next to Rose. He carefully picked up the largest broken shard of the shattered glass flower. He looked at the small crowd of elite executives who had followed him inside. This masterpiece was forged with pure love, deep sacrifice, and a kind of unselfish bravery that money can never buy. Henry announced loudly, "I am officially appraising this beautiful work of art at exactly $1 million. Rose gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her scarred hands as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. But Henry was not finished yet. He pulled a thick, gold-embossed leather folder from his assistant's briefcase. "I am also transferring the full ownership of our company's largest royal production facility directly into your name, Rose. You are no longer a struggling shop owner fighting just to survive. You are the new chief master artisan of my entire global empire, and your father will immediately be moved to the best private respiratory hospital in the country." fully paid for by me. A massive, overwhelming wave of pure relief washed over Rose. The incredibly heavy burden she had carried entirely alone for years was finally lifted from her tired, scarred shoulders. Months later, the cold, dark shop was completely transformed into a bright, warm, and massive artistic studio. Rose's father was sitting in a comfortable leather chair, breathing completely fine without his heavy oxygen tanks, smiling warmly at his daughter. Henry's little daughter ran across the room and happily threw her arms around Rose's waist, hugging her tightly. Henry walked up behind her, holding something sparkling behind his back. He got down on one knee, right in the middle of the busy, happy studio. He pulled out a perfectly crafted, one-of-a-kind crystal rose that glowed brilliantly under the bright studio lights. It was completely unbreakable, just like the beautiful woman standing in front of him. He asked her to be his wife, and she said yes with all her beautiful heart. Those who steadfastly plant seeds of deep goodness will always harvest the sweetest miracles in the end. If this story touched your heart today, do not forget to hit that subscribe button so we can keep walking this journey together, and leave your final powerful declaration below. I believe a resilient heart through the red fire will turn into a brilliant crystal.